Welcome to ScaleSec's latest webinar, The Current State of AI Governance with Greg Peterson. I'm Emily Ryan, the Chief Revenue Officer at ScaleSec. We're excited to host Schellman for today's webinar. Our partnership with the Schellman team has been off to a great start, and we're looking forward to hearing from Danny Manimbo about ISO 42001. Gotta get it right. Please feel free to ask questions throughout using the Q&A function, and we'll leave time for answers at the end. With that, I'll pass the mic to Greg. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
All right. Thanks so much, Emily. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the meeting. So I guess webinar would be more appropriate. What we're going to run through today is basically the importance of AI safeguards, as well as the regulations and the compliance landscape around them. We're primarily going to focus on ISO 42001, and then we'll touch into where is this going, where's ISO 42001 going, where are the regulations going, and then we'll finally end up with a Q&A. So the goal of this at the end, AI is a buzzword, everybody's talking about it. Not too many people are out there talking about how you manage your compliance, how you make sure the governance is around this. So the standards are starting to come out, and people should really understand what you need to do in regards to AI. So without further ado, we'll go through introductions. My name is Greg Peterson. I'm a consulting director at ScaleSec. I lead up our compliance practice. I've been doing security close to 3 decades now, and I've been focusing on cloud for probably the last 9 years. And Danny, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Danny Manimbo, happy to be here. One of the principals at Schellman. I've been at the firm for 11 years, based in Denver, Colorado. My role here, I'm one of our CPAs, so oversee our SOC reporting and attestation services. And I'm also the leader of our ISO and AI services.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Danny. All right. So we're going to jump right into this. What we're going to do is I'm going to kind of walk through the slides, and then we're going to have Danny offer his expertise on this as we go through. We're going to start with AI safeguards and governance. So there's a lot of importance around this when you get into AI. So they're in 3 main areas here. You want to be sure you're having the proper use of it. So is it ethical? Are you preventing people from using it in the way that was not intended? We can then go into bias. We want to be sure that when you use AI, you don't have bias in it. An example of bias, just to kind of get everybody on the same page, back in 2018, Amazon had this idea that they were hiring so many engineers, they wanted to create an AI model that would basically weed out resumes. So if they got 100 resumes, they're hoping they could get 5 resumes of engineers that they're most likely to hire. And the goal was basically to get rid of bias in hiring. They wanted to have it basically wide open and have everybody looked at equally. That was the goal. The issue, which they found when they started using it, is the AI was rejecting almost all female candidates. And so if they had anything that said women's college, women's organization, they're actually getting rejected. And so Amazon actually went in, looked at it, and realized that the data that they were building this model on was biased. So how was it biased? They basically had all their previous applicants plus their current workers, which were predominantly male, about 95% male in the engineering department. They were using that to build the model. The model then learned based off the data. And since the data was biased, it determined that, well, female candidates don't work based on the data you provide. So Amazon scrapped that completely, but that's an example of bias. You don't want bias in your information. You want to be sure that whatever your AI product does, it aligns with your societal values. You want to be sure that it also aligns with your legal requirements out there. There's not as much legal requirements as of yet, but they're coming, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And then when you're building out AI, there's continuous improvement. So do you want your AI to continue to learn, get smarter based off what it's been doing? You need to be sure that you're doing that, but you're balancing the strengthening of your AI and your AI governance along without stifling innovation moving forward. So you want to have a balance there. You don't want, I guess, a best example, Skynet out there where it's self-learning and becomes self-aware, but you do want to ensure that you actually have governance and controls in AI but it's still usable. So that's the back and forth security thing, is how secure do you want it? How usable do you want it? You generally have a balance between the two. And just the final note there, AI is not inherently good or evil. It's not fair or biased, ethical or unethical. It's basically a tool that you use. What you put into it is what you get out of it. So, Danny, I covered a little bit here. Anything you want to touch on?
No, great points, Greg. And I think to your point, AI as a relatively quote unquote new tool, it certainly brings about unique responsibilities and considerations by those who use it, right? And it's going to have a lot of unique considerations that aren't considered by traditional, what we're accustomed to with traditional security and privacy programs. So a lot of the things that you mentioned, bias and fairness, to your point, are often rooted in data issues. For example, the weeding out of female resumes, that's a data representation issue, right? You've got data quality issues, you've got model training issues. Again, all fairly unique and likely not to be considered by what would be a traditional security audit that you think of today in a SOC 2 or an ISO 27001. Even responsible ethical use and safety, again, unique areas. So there are things that you want to be considering. And I like the quote about, AI is not inherently good or evil, biased or unbiased, but its use can be, and can certainly seem to be so if you don't have the safeguards that we're going to be talking through, throughout the presentation today in mind, and kind of a framework to operate within. And I know a lot of times, folks get very nervous with AI, and they think a lot of the risks that it introduces, really make it not worth it. That we should just kind of close the box, quote unquote, on AI. But it's certainly against human innovation or human nature, I should say, to shutter innovation. But the key is, we just want to continue to adopt the technology, reap all the many benefits that AI has, but keep these safeguards that we're going to be talking through in mind. So we're doing it in a responsible manner.
Excellent. Thanks, Danny. That's a great idea. This is a new technology. We're going to learn as we go. So after I just said it was a new technology, I'm going to start running through some frameworks and regulations. But one key point, AI, the first time AI was really coined and talked about, most people don't realize, was in 1956. So there's something called the Dartmouth Convention or conference, sorry, that was in England. And they took a lot of what Alan Turing had said and put something together and basically defined artificial intelligence in the 50s. All right, we are now 70 years later, and we're really getting around mainstream adoption of AI. Main reasons, computational power, algorithms, people working around that. We really haven't been capable of taking advantage of it until now. So when we talk about AI being a new thing, it's not a new thing. It's just the actual ability to use it and where we are today is a new thing. And so based on that, I wanted to run through a few of these regulations and frameworks that are coming out. So the first one there, ISO 42001, we're going to talk extensively about that today. But we also have NIST. So NIST came out with an AI risk management framework. And if you start looking on the dates of both of these, they're in January and December of 2023. These are all new standards that have come out. If we start going through the others, EU, MITRE, OWASP, CISA with the NCSC, they're all in 2020s. They're all within the last 3 years that these regulations have come out. So we are basically at the cutting edge of where these regulations are coming. The NIST and the ISO, just real quick, we're going to cover ISO in more depth, but if you're not familiar, ISO is an international standard based out of Geneva, Switzerland, that basically sets standards for all sorts of stuff. It can set standards for railways, but it does a lot of standards around information technology, which is what we're talking about here. NIST does the same thing, but it's based out of the US and it sets standards. The difference between the two is NIST is sponsored by the US government and everything you get from them is free. When you go through ISO actually you have to pay for every document you download from them. And they do cross-reference other documents. But they have 170 member countries that are actually part of ISO, including the United States. So NIST and ISO can work together. Generally, companies will choose one or the other depending where they're working out of. As far as these regulations, Danny, any thoughts or in particular notes you want to bring up?
Yeah, no, I think it's a helpful graphic just to see where we are and how quick, some of these things have come online the last 12 plus months. I think NIST AI RMF, in the beginning of 2023 really kind of started what is that quote unquote AI governance conversation. Just because you see a lot of chatter around, we need to use AI responsibly, we need to use it in a trustworthy manner. It's like, what does that actually mean? And before NIST AI RMF, that was a pretty open-ended question. And then certainly at the close of 2023, a lot of the focus shifted towards ISO 42001 for a lot of the reasons that we'll discuss today. Most prominently is, the ISO name brand is pretty prominent here in the US, especially in the last 10 plus years with the widespread adoption of, ISO 27001 as a fundamental element of a lot of folks' security programs. So trending in the right direction, just as far as finally getting some frameworks into place, and eventually what will be any day now. I didn't check the news this morning, but could the EU AI Act, I know, is days away from becoming formal law, and the first legislation that we're going to be seeing for AI.
That's excellent. Thanks, Danny. As we keep growing and as you keep hearing about AI, we had an internal discussion today on the fact that AI is actually propping up a lot of companies where they're hitting I believe it's $3 trillion in value at NVIDIA and Microsoft. It's growing so rapidly that regulations have got to continue to follow that. So we'll see a lot more of those. All right, so now we're just going to get specific into ISO 42001. And we're going to cover an overview of this. So ISO will basically create standards, as we talked about, based on where there's a need. The issue was they started seeing the increased use and adoption of AI across all sorts of organizations. Therefore, they decided to create a standard. They created it. By the way, ISO numbering 42001 is a standard. The current year that it was released, 2023, is a current version. So when you see the colon in year, that explains the year that actually came out. They created the AI management system, which is what 42001 is. It created an AI management system standard, as well as the management system itself. And there's a certification available. So the way ISO works, for at least in IT, I'm not sure about everywhere, if you generally have something ending with 001, it's a certifiable standard. So if you have ISO 27001, you can get certified to it. ISO 9001, you can get certified to it. This is 42001. So this is actually something you can get certified to it. It will have additional documents like 42002, 3, 4. I think ISO 27000 has 30 or 40 documents that go all the way back on that. But the one you actually get certified to is the 01. They have created a ton of supporting documents around this as well. And once again, it's pay to play. You do have to pay to actually get these documents from ISO, but they have the 22989. If you want to actually understand AI a little bit better, that runs through all the concepts and terminology that is used around AI. So if you do want to get a little bit better feel for it, that's how ISO interprets AI. You have the 23894. This is all about managing risk management in AI environments. And then you have 38507. 38507 is for governance. It's basically for leaders in a company to understand how they should govern AI, what they should set the guidelines, the controls for their company around. So 42001, we mentioned you can get certified in it. As of now, as of a Google search yesterday, only 2 companies have announced that they've actually been certified in this because it is pretty much a brand new certification. So thoughts on that, Danny? Because I know Schellman is working towards actually certifying companies.
Yeah, we're working towards our accreditation. We're hoping to be amongst the first in the cohort of US firms. Our accreditation body is A&AB, and we're working through that process with them at the moment. And yeah, there have been some interesting claims on 42001 certification. I think a lot of folks are really eager to demonstrate that they're the first company certified in their respective industry or field. And I think I saw the first claim in Q4 before the 42,001 standard was actually published, which was a head scratcher. And then you click into the article and it turns out the company was certified against the final draft of 42,001. And it creates a little bit of confusion. So, I haven't had a chance to go into every single 42,001 certification claim out there on the internet today. But the one thing I would say is, just be weary of some of the claims and ensuring that it is an accredited certification, because we at Schellman, we're not accredited today, but we could go out and certify an organization. It wouldn't be an accredited certification. So it really diminishes the value of that ISO certification. It's not the way we do business at Schellman. And the kind of idea, well, why be accredited? What's the value there? It essentially means that we work with accreditation bodies and they hold us accountable for the way we do our audits, whether that be 27,001, 42,001, et cetera. We're accredited for all the standards that we do, within at Schellman. And like I said, it holds us accountable for ensuring the audits are done the right way. We're allocating the right resources. Our team has the correct competence. We're using the right amount of audit time. Our certificate and the deliverables meet the intent and requirements of the standards. And we're continually audited on that. So it's auditors auditing the auditors. But like I said, it gives you peace of mind that when you pick up a certification and it has an accreditation body seal on there, or multiple accreditation body seals on there, like we do at Schellman, it gives you peace of mind that the audit was done the right way with the right due diligence and professional care.
Excellent. And that Danny brought up a key point is this is brand new. So certifications will start coming more frequently, but this is pretty much brand new coming out. So we're going to switch from the overview and go into the intent a little bit more. So basically the intent of the AI management system is to ensure that the development and use of AI is done very responsibly. They want to ensure that risks are addressed, and we're going to talk a lot about risk, ethical considerations, trustworthy AI, and then they want it to integrate. So everything in ISO is basically built to integrate with other parts of the ISO. We're going to talk about that when we get down to later sections on there. But Danny, anything on what ISO was intending on 42,001 that you wanted to drop in here?
Yeah, sure. It filled a very open void, just in terms of how organizations can really demonstrate responsible use of AI. Like I said, previously, there wasn't really a framework or boundaries to operate within to have a way, an internationally accepted way of demonstrating that. So that, really is the main objective here. And then I think one thing that's good to clarify is who are the intended audience of 42,001, because there is some confusion there in terms of organizations thinking that if they're not a quote unquote AI company, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the model developers of the world, that the standard doesn't apply to them, whereas it's really intended to be used by any organizations that are either developing, producing, or providing products and services that utilize AI. So that could be AI models that you're creating in-house and delivering externally, or it could be you're using third-party sourced AI within the delivery of your services. So it really applies to multiple different types of organizations, depending on their individual use cases, which we'll talk about today. So that's kind of one thing to clear up is, and you'll see that with a lot of ISO standards, they are really intended to be broad, to apply to a wide range of organizations out there, since they are international in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Broad is a great point. So this is written to work at a financial institution. This is written to work for construction, for healthcare. They have to keep it broad. You're not going to get as much specifics as you'd like, or you would see, let's say, in a NIST standard. All right. So major concerns that they had, and these were the areas that they wanted to address. So automated decision making. If you want AI to make decisions, do you want it to make medical decisions? Does it pull the plug? Does it decide what you want to do? That's the high end of it. Do you want to have it make business decisions for you? There may need oversight depending on what the decisions are out there. Data analysis, insight, machine learning. So AI will ultimately replace some human activity on there. If you want to be doing that, you would also want to ensure what it's doing is consistent and that's not actually causing impact. So then once again, we're going to talk about risk. And then continuous learning. So there's two types of really models. One, you can bring in a static model. I forget the name of it, but you basically bring it in and that's the model. The information that's there, that's how the AI system works off that. The second is a continuous learning system that basically will take an information, and then as it continues to process information, it will have a feedback loop and feed that information back into the model and continue to update as it moves forward. That's great, but as it continues to learn, if you don't have the proper controls in there, it may actually bypass those controls. So Danny, thoughts on the concerns around this you want to share?
Yeah, that's the key. Obviously, bypassing controls gives us auditors a little bit of heartburn. But the main thing that you want to consider here is that these systems, these tools, these technologies that you're adopting remain auditable over time. So you have a way of monitoring whether they are continuing to operate as intended, that you're avoiding unintended consequences of the technology, and that kind of roots back to this concept of a system impact assessment, which we'll talk about today. And that there's situations like you mentioned with adaptive systems where they can learn over time and circumvent existing governance controls. So what types of monitoring controls do you have in place to ensure that if that happens, there's a way of detecting and mitigating it to ensure that it continues to operate within your acceptable use thresholds that you define as an organization?
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, we're not trying to say not to do AI because there's stuff that can happen. We just need to go into AI understanding that we need governance around it, just like any technology that we use. All right, so we are now going to actually get into the structure of 42001. It's an ISO standard. If you've seen them before, this will make sense. If not, it's going to look a little scary, but we're just going to walk through. We're not going to go in depth in every part. We're going to take some key parts of it and talk about that. But this is so you can understand what this standard does. So we're not going to talk a lot on this page, but this is the standard. The standard consists of clauses. So clauses 4 through 10. And then it has annexes. The Annex A is a list of controls you have to hit. There's 38 controls in that. We're going to go on that a little bit more detail. You have Annex B, which basically helps you interpret Annex A. We'll talk about that. And then you have 2 additional annexes we're going to talk about later. But this is the structure of 42001. We're not going to spend much time on this. I'm just going to move forward to the next slide. And I'm going to start talking about the clauses. So we chose a couple clauses based on interpretation and the importance of those. We're starting with 4.1. And this is the organization and context. So when you actually go into an AI management system, in theory, before you get into AI, and I know how most companies work, is somebody will start playing in a sandbox in AI before governance comes out there. But when you actually want to get certified and show that you have governance around this, what you really need to do is go in and examine your AI, how you're using it, basically understand your scope, direction, what you want to use it for, why you're using it, what data you're going to put into it. You have to define your role, and this ties back to another ISO document where you can actually pull more information on it. And then you need to know your contexts. So you have internal context and you have external context on there. So internally, you may have controls, governance objectives, what you're trying to accomplish with AI. If you have contractual obligations, it's we agree to do this for whatever company or organization. That's also part of your internal context. Basically, this is defining why you want it internally. But then you also have to address your external context. And so those can be legal requirements. You have no control over that. You have to meet your legal requirements. Regulators are going to continue to update. This is probably going to be over the next 10 years, I can imagine 10 different versions of everything's going to come out. Once again, you want to hit your cultural norms, ethics, and competitive landscape. You want to see where that's going. So these are all things when you start putting a management system around it that you should actually examine and be aware of. I threw in on the bottom climate change. Every ISO document is now basically putting a section in there says climate change, see if what you're doing is relevant to it. So I wanted to throw that out there. Danny, clause 4.1, anything you want to cover on this one?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. This is really a foundational clause, not only because it's the first clause in the ISO standard, but it really kind of sets the the direction for where you want your AI management system or aims and ISO certification to be scoped, the direction you want to go in, and this will influence how you kind of do all the underlying management system activities. So now what are your objectives now that you've kind of really honed in on your scope? How will this inform your risk assessment and everything in terms of the controls that you select and mitigate any controls that are identified or to mitigate any risks that are identified through your risk assessment process. So getting this right is really important. And to your point, just to kind of touch on the climate change, this is an interesting one too. To your point, this has been added to every management system standard out there, but for AI specifically, interesting consideration given all the compute resources that AI is currently using and estimated to continue to be utilizing in the future, especially for data centers, et cetera. So that one shouldn't be just written off immediately if it's not an ESG or something related scope.
Yeah, that's a key point. So you can have very narrow models, or you can have like a large language model, which is a Chat GPT or Gemini, where they take everything in and try to answer, versus a very specific narrow set that you put in there. One of those uses a lot more processing power. If you can get by with a smaller set from a climate point of view, that probably makes sense to use that one. All right, so stakeholders, you do have to identify your stakeholders when you have an AI system. Now, this is a list from the document showing the major stakeholders. I'm just going to talk about 3 real quick and hand it over to Danny. But you have providers, producers, and customers. So customers are using the product, providers are actually providing a product or a service, and producers are designing, developing, testing, deploying products that use AI systems. So Danny, there's a lot of nuances here. You want to kind of down the differences between a provider and a producer?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the unique aspects of 42001, which kind of stands apart from other management system standards. But I suppose the closest tie-in would be, if anybody on the webinar is familiar with 27701, it's a privacy-related standard. And it has a requirement where you would define your role with respect to how you interact with PII. You could be a controller, you could be a processor, you could be both. And what that role determination does is it defines the applicability and the extent of the applicability for a lot of the requirements and controls within the standard. So 42001 is no different there. You would want to define, and again, this goes back, there's a reason why this was mentioned in clause 4.1, the first clause of the standard. It's foundational. It's how are you utilizing AI within your organization as it relates to the scope of services under review. So you could be you can say what you want about the terminology that ISO picked here, but they use the words producer and provider. And I think those are going to be the 2 most common that at least we at Schellman see as far as organizations that we certify. We're typically working with service providers, SaaS providers, MSPs, data centers, those types of organizations. So they are providing some type of service that utilizes AI, right? So that would put them in that kind of provider bucket as a service or product provider. The other one there is producer. Not everybody will fall into this bucket. Think of, I used the example earlier of the OpenAIs, of the Anthropics, the model creators, implementers, et cetera. They are producing AI technology. Obviously, it's not limited to just those 2 organizations, but they're fairly widely known in the market space. So they're actually creating the AI technology. They're in-house creating LLMs. So even if that's your organization, you're not using third-party sourced AI, you are doing in-house AI development, that would put you in a producer category. So it's possible, Greg, that you'd sit in both roles. If that's the case, and then you're, of course, packaging that product up that you're producing and providing it to your users, that would put you in a producer and provider role. And to close the loop on the customer or user, this is similar to, there's another ISO standard, not to fill your brain with too many numbers today, but there's 27,017, and that's security related, but it's specific to cloud services. And they have in that standard, you can take kind of two different points of view or avenues with that standard. You can go down the cloud service provider route, or you can go down the cloud service customer route. And you can make the argument that as a SaaS, you sit in both, right? Because it's technically a upstream and downstream relationship, right? You're a cloud service customer to AWS or whatever cloud service provider you're using, and you're a cloud service provider to your customers, right? So it kind of depends on what you'd want that certificate to look like, because the role will be clearly noted on your 42001 certificate. So XYZ organization providing 123 service as a AI product or service provider, or as a producer as well. So if you want to include your role as a customer user on there, that would be a consideration too.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that, Danny. And I know that can definitely get confusing as you go on. All right. We're going to skip to 6. So right now we're only going to cover clauses 4 and 6 out of the 2 through 10. So we're not going to go through each of them. But this is all about risk and opportunities. So as an organization, when you're going to AI, you're supposed to basically brainstorm your risk and your opportunities that are out there. And you need to determine how they should be addressed. There's guidance and additional ISO documents that are listed here. And there's some key considerations down here as far as what you should think about when you're going through your risk management here. And in fact, there's 31,000 that we haven't talked about, which is all about risk management and ISO. There's a document 23894, which is listed above, basically is based off that. So this is a full risk management that you'd actually set up for AI. Danny, you want to touch on any of these? I know there's quite a bit in that diagram.
Yeah, just quickly, I think, again, to your point, 42001, it's a management system standard. So it's going to revolve around your risk assessment process. And then there's supplementary standards. The 42001 standard will give you kind of the rules of engagement, how to perform a risk assessment. It doesn't necessarily give you insights in all of the additional guidance that would be included in the 23894 and the 35807 that you included there as well, or 38507, I should say. So just additional, documents to consider as you're performing that assessment.
Perfect. And we'll just cover a little bit more on risk and then we'll stop with this. So there's a lot of impacts that you could be concerned with as an organization. So right off the bat, you want to be sure you understand your stakeholders, what they're looking for, what their concerns of, but you also need to be sure that you cause no harm on there. So there's different types of harm to human beings. This could be potentially a self-driving car that goes crazy. This could be medical decisions that happen, denial of essential services. You want to be sure that your product is not denying essential services. Let's say your water department decides to use AI and they can shut off based off an AI decision. Do they want that to happen? Human rights, social responsibility, environmental responsibility. These are all things that we do have to actually examine as part of setting up this AI management system. So I'm just going to skip off that one and go into, there's a lot of meat around this one, and this should be the last of the clauses that we're going to talk about, but this is the system impact analysis. So it's a process that you run through and you list out basically the potential consequences of using AI. So you actually do have to think about what you're trying to do, what your goals are, what your objectives, and then potential consequences that come from using it. And you would basically do a risk assessment of it. There's guidance right now for this in the ISO 42005 standard, which is not currently approved, or at least it wasn't last time I looked, but you can still actually pay to download a draft version and get that version. And when we start going through the A5 controls, this is from Annex A, which we're going to talk about the controls. They actually break down the system impact assessment process. So Danny, I know this is a big portion of when you're going to start looking at companies getting certified. Can you kind of walk through the SIA, the key points that you're looking for when people are trying to get authorized?
Yeah, certainly. And to your point, this is a required component of the overall risk assessment process. ISO kind of looks at risk assessment and system impact assessment, a little bit differently. Risk assessment being more organizational strategy, managerial level, whereas the system impact assessment gets really into the specifics on the intended use of the quote unquote system itself, whatever that scope may be for your product, right? And that's, again, identification of the individuals, groups of individuals, societies that may be impacted by the use of this. Intended users, what are your data quality characteristics, and how are you ensuring that it kind of stays within acceptable thresholds over time? That could be information on the models and the algorithms that you're using, the benefits and harms, that could happen through unintended use, or misuse or abuse, I should say, of the product. So really diving into all those things can really help define, like I said, acceptable thresholds for when things do start to go off the rails. You have some type of idea, and then subsequently mitigating controls and decisions you can make as an organization with respect to how to mitigate those activities.
And this is not a one-time activity, is it, Danny? It should be done frequently?
No, yeah, definitely. As with all things ISO, it's meant to be a continuous system. So certainly, changes in the use of the AI system and the sensitivity of the data you might have, complexity, et cetera, your operating environment. AI is one of those things that's going to be different tomorrow than it is today. So it's one of those things that you want to continue, that scales with your organization over time.
And that's kind of a key with ISO management standards, is they are not a point in time, I'm getting audited, let's get everything in place. They're basically there to see that you have it in place and that you're actually using it throughout time and you're following your standard. So we're basically done with the clauses. We're going to run through what the annexes are. There's 4 of those. We'll run through those, and then we'll go basically from there to covering what's next, and then we'll go to a Q&A. So if you do have any questions, there's the Q&A tab. You can go in there and type those in, and we'll get to those at the end. So right now, Annex A is a list of your controls. So Annex A has 9 different categories. They're broken down because it's ISO. They start at A2 instead of A1, and they go to A10 on there. But they do have 10 control objectives. So each control has an objective. 6 is split into 2, so it has 2 objectives. And there's 38 individual controls. I've listed them here. I don't want to go into detail and too much, but the final column is how many controls are in each. Danny, if you could pick one of these first 4 controls that you want to talk about, anything you want to mention?
Yeah, just I think the focus on the AI system impact assessment, ISO is probably telling us something there, that they really want this to be a focal point for organizations. It's both, as you noted, a component of the required clauses as well as the controls, and the controls will give you a little bit of a more fine-grained look of how that's supposed to be framed out. So just the prevalence of how that activity can impact both clauses and controls.
Perfect. All right, and we'll go to the second half of these. So we have A6 and 1, A6 2, they're split apart. And then it goes through 10 here. Danny, once again, any one control you want to really focus on here?
Yeah, I like A7. That's the data for the AI systems. As you kind of brought up originally, the effectiveness of any AI system really is all rooted in the data, the acquisition of it, the training of it, the fine tuning, et cetera. So really ensuring that organizations are putting a big stress point on their data sources, et cetera. Very important. And then certainly, third-party risk management with respect to AI. We get a lot of questions about A10 is something to think about from both vendors, suppliers, partners, customers.
Perfect. All right. So Annex B. Annex B is the largest portion. When you download the 42001 document, it takes up almost half of it. This basically explains and provides guidance on the Annex A controls. So it will basically explain, we just talked about 7. It would explain 7 in more details. This is not the law. The law is actually Annex A. This is guidance that you can use to interpret the law on this. So sometimes it's sufficient, sometimes it's not. Basically, this is to help you, but I guess, Danny, let's go back to you. If I came in as a client wanting to get 42001 certification and I am relying strictly on Annex B, is that to my detriment on there?
It could be. It's supposed to be utilized as a useful tool, but it becomes a detriment when organizations look at this as a requirements checklist, right? I have to have all 10 of these attributes that are included in Annex B for each particular control in Annex A. That's not the intent. The intent is to help organizations determine how they can demonstrate or implement, because organizations, a lot of them are doing this for the very first time, implement controls to meet the intent of the standard, right? And it's going to give you a whole lot of considerations, and not all of those apply to every organization and every use case of AI. So I think that's the intent. Not letter of the law, to your point, but intended to be a useful tool. Some or all may apply to you, and feel free to think outside the box of what's in Annex B as well.
All right, there we go. That's Annex B. We'll get into Annex C now. So Annex C is basically helping you outline your objectives, your risk sources when you're putting this AI management system together. It's not intended to be exhaustive. You can use the 23894 for additional guidance on these. And it's basically, you want to evaluate your AI systems regularly. Once again, this is not a point in time management system. This is a regular review. And it runs through 11 different objectives and 7 different risk sources. And so when we start talking about these, like a risk source is C31, the first one there, complexity environment. So let's talk about Tesla or any other self-driving car. Their environment they're in, they have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of different data sources they need to be aware of to ensure that the vehicle doesn't run into somebody, doesn't actually harm the person, doesn't break a law. That is a very, very, very complex environment. There's probably different concerns with that than if I'm making a decision to approve or deny a $10 charge at some point. So that's where complexity could come in. C32 is transparency, explainability. Explainability, I really like. Explainability is you have an AI model and you ask it to make a decision. So like Gemini, I go into Gemini or I go to ChatGPT and I say, please tell me what I should do or how I should do this. It will give you an answer. Explainability is where the system can actually tell you how it came to that conclusion and answer. And a lot of the time on AI systems, you don't have the explainability. You don't have the back-end transparency of seeing where the decision came from. Anything on this, Danny, you want to touch on as well?
Yeah, again, Annex B and C and D, for that matter, are all meant to be, just guidance. So you use the example of Tesla for their risk sources. Obviously, one of their objectives would be safety as well, right? So that's the idea. Everyone is basically standing up what is their AI management systems for the first time. Defining your objectives as an organization is one of the requirements of the clauses. So you can use Annex C as, again, tools and a starting point for helping determine what those objectives are, and then also the risk sources to help drive, what will be that also required risk assessment process.
Excellent. All right, now we're just going to cover Annex D. So Annex D, we talked about the AI management system as being a management system standard. There are other management system standards. The next slide will cover those. The goal of ISO is to make sure these integrate together. So ISO AI talks about technology. There are technology management system standards that are out there that you would want to tie into it. It's not really a standalone. This is more of a way to tie in existing systems that you already have. So I'm going to skip to the next slide and let Danny kind of talk about the integration, how it integrates, and what the goal of the Annex D is.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And as we mentioned, 42001 was really intended to integrate with existing security. If you have 27001 privacy for 27701 and/or quality for 9001 programs. Those management system standards and related certifications are not prerequisites in any way for being 42001 certified. You could just be 42001 certified. It's entirely possible. But there's a reason why 42001 chose these three standards to demonstrate and incorporate within Annex D of 42001. Obviously, with security in 27001, AI as a technology, that one's pretty straightforward. Security is typically top of mind for a technology, but with privacy and PII, if your AI system is processing and or interacting with PII, you'd want to ensure that your existing, AI and privacy programs are integrated. The idea is that you have an AI management system, I should say you don't have an AI system and a separate security program, right? Or privacy program. Everything should be really integrated because those risks should be managed holistically. And with 9001, that one probably doesn't get talked about quite as much as 27001 and 27701 for security and privacy, but this is specific to quality, at least as it relates to the IT environment in terms of 9001. But it's a great standard, and the relation makes a lot of sense because the intent of this standard is to boost customer confidence in your service. It is very process and data driven. We've talked about the importance of data and AI systems. So it is really a nice complement to an existing, 9001 certification to have 42001 as well.
Perfect. So that concludes running through the high level what 42001 is. We're going to quickly talk about where we're going next. And then we do have 3 questions right now in the Q&A, which we'll run through those answers. If you have any additional questions, now's a great time to put them in. All right, so this is specific next steps for ISO 42001. So certification bodies are pursuing accreditation. So they have to be accredited, as Danny talked about ahead of time, before you can actually get an official certification on this. As far as June 2024, there are not a lot of accredited or certifications out there for companies that can actually provide you this service yet. When you do go in, this is a new standard. So if you've been through ISO 27001 or another standard, you understand there's a stage 1, there's a stage 2. Basically, you'll come in for an audit. You'll have a stage 1 where they'll examine everything. Then there'll be a set amount of time where they'll actually do a stage 2 to be sure that you're actually following what you showed in stage 1. And at that point, then you could actually achieve your certification. When you get a certification, it's good for 3 years. You have that first year. Then every year for the next 2 years, you actually go through and get a surveillance audit or review. And then the year after that, you're going to have to go through the full thing again. So Danny, in regards to this, I know Schellman, I think you're working right now and you're getting close to actually getting accredited, or do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Like I said, we're aggressively pursuing accreditation, hoping to be in the small handful of firms in the U.S. who can do 42000 work. But that's what I would say. If you're interested in 42001 certification services, ensure whatever certification body you choose to engage with does have a clear path for accreditation if they're not accredited already, for a lot of the reasons that we talked about before about technically any organization can issue an unaccredited cert, and you want to make sure you're getting the right value out of your certification and the partner you choose from a certification body standpoint.
Perfect. Quick question. If an organization already has a 27001 or even a SOC 2, is achieving 42001 going to be a little bit easier for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. One we're getting a lot just because SOC 2 and 27001 are really such mainstays in the security space these days, just as far as demonstrating your security program. What I would say is those are security focused audits, right? And 42001 is laser focused on AI use cases for all the reasons that we talked about today. So if we want to do the comparison with 27001, you have the foundation there, right? Because we mentioned the structure of the standard is the same. You still have to have scope and objectives, and you could do your risk assessment and internal audit process, all of those things. But with 27001, you're looking at it from a security standpoint, where now, it's 42001 and all the unique considerations that come with that we talked about today. So while the foundational processes are there, those processes just need to be tweaked or enhanced, to ensure that you're covering off on what are all those AI specific considerations. And then quickly on the SOC 2, so the AICPA hasn't come out with any kind of AI specific SOC report that right now, but there are ways that you can incorporate AI considerations into an existing SOC 2. I mentioned this is typically at least a security focused audit. The processing integrity category is an interesting one. It's probably the most rare that we see in SOC reports at Schellman. But if you kind of think about what that category is intended to do, it is intended to verify the accuracy, completeness, et cetera, of how transactions are processed or decisions are made and how end users interact with the system. And that's a lot about AI and explainability and transparency and accuracy, all those things that kind of come with that. So that would be an interesting consideration if you have an existing SOC 2 and 42001 certification is not something that you can maybe do in the near term of how you could scale potentially your SOC 2 to include more, AI considerations.
Excellent, thanks on that. Let's move to the last slide here. So these are the key takeaways that we hope you're getting from this, but data is key with AI. The data you put in, garbage out. You need to know good data versus bad data, your biases that are out there. You need to understand where it's coming from. You need to maintain. So you actually do have to maintain AI systems. You can't just let them go. There's maintenance that has to happen on that. You have to do risk management. We talked about risk management quite a bit here. So you have to actually analyze all the risk. Once again, it's a brainstorming process to go through these risks that are out there. And then finally, you have to know your obligations. You have contractual, you have regulatory, you even have society driven obligations for you. So Danny, do you have anything quickly to say on this before we go to the questions?
Yeah, I think to your point, garbage in, garbage out. It all starts with data. Just make sure that you understand, kind of how to secure that data, not only from a sourcing perspective, but training over time. And then what compliance obligations exist. Obviously, more will impact organizations if, say, we talked about the EU AI Act. If you're doing business in Europe, that's something that you're going to need to consider and kind of scale your risk management program to include as well.
Perfect. All right, so we're going to run through the Q&A. I'm going to read these questions, and Danny, I'm going to read them to you and give you first pass at. So what is the high-level process for conducting internal audits, especially concerning AI technologies? Anything we should do to prepare for this? They haven't been through it before. So
sure. Yeah, the internal audit, just like any management system standard, is a required component of 42001. We did get a lot of questions on how we can ensure our team, from our clients' perspective, how do they ensure that their teams are, aware of, AI concepts and, auditing techniques, et cetera. And this being we could talk about a kind of a new quote unquote tool, you want to make sure that your employees are constantly, or I should say consistently trained and made aware of the developing trends with AI. So that could be incorporating things into your security awareness training of how they can interact with AI, how they shouldn't be, things they should be looking for. But with the internal audit specifically, they've launched recently 42001 lead auditor, lead implementer trainings that you can have your employees go through, just so that you have the peace of mind that whoever is conducting that internal audit is competent on AI technologies, and that would serve the benefit is supposed to serve in that internal audit.
Perfect. And if you're looking at doing 27001, that requires internal audit as well. So if you haven't done an internal audit before, you probably haven't done 27001. It might be worthwhile to examine both of those at the same time, 42001 and 27001. All right, next question, Danny. Any recommendations how we can ensure transparency and explainability in our AI algorithms and decision-making processes? So
yeah,
yeah,
it's a great question. I mean, this is touched on a bit in the controls, but I think would ultimately be addressed and best analyzed through that AI system impact assessment. That's where you're going through all the characteristics and thresholds that are within your AI system. So, for example, you have to go through a formal documentation process of defining, what is quality data, what happens when there's misuse or abuse, and with that is going to come the transparency, the explainability, et cetera. Getting that on paper, rolling that into a component of your risk assessment process will be key.
Okay, excellent. And last question that we have, any recommended training programs, awareness initiatives to help employees stay informed about their responsibilities regarding, I guess, information security as a whole, but AI technology specifically?
Yeah, I think this concept of training has continued to evolve over time. With GDPR, it was one of those things where folks wanted to make sure that they had privacy considerations now within their trainings, or if they were operating in a HIPAA compliant environment, how do we tie in PHI and those types of considerations. So what we're seeing with AI is very much the same. For example, at Schellman, we don't use AI for any kind of client-facing matters or with any client data, right? That's something that you want to ensure is effectively communicated within a security awareness training or an AI acceptable use policy, right? Just to ensure that organizations are, whether it's internal or externally, using AI in a responsible manner and for the reasons that the technology was adopted in the first place, just to ensure that there's no abuse there.
Excellent. And ScaleSec does the same thing. We have an AI policy. We are strictly forbidden to put any client data into any sort of AI on there. And that's because you do not control the data once you submit it to them. So something to be aware of. All right, we've made it through all the questions. We've ran through basically what AI risk and concerns around governance are. We've talked through 42,001, give you a big broad overview of the clauses as well as the controls in Annex A, and then what the rest of the document is for. Danny, we would love to thank you for showing up and having Schellman as a partner support us in this conversation. And as far as anything else that's going on, we have our contact information on the screen here. So ScaleSec can help you with any sort of advisory around this. And then Schellman would be the company that would actually go out there and certify you when you're ready to go and get that certification. Any last minute comments, Danny, before we end the meeting?
I don't. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and appreciate the opportunity, Greg and ScaleSec team.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the meeting.